Hello, reading room. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. It is May 5th, day 343 in the classroom. I am going to continue reading and read to the end of the chapter, and then we'll be done with that one and get started with another one. I think that this is still an interesting conversation. Sometimes I think people get from me maybe God overload, but I don't know why, considering there are so many believers in the population. And these are good questions. So I keep trucking along. The greater necessity of mind. Now having granted, so this is No Place for a Small God is the title of the chapter by Howard J. Van Til, and the section that we're talking about is section number 2, or part number 2, approaches to scientific and theological answers. Part number 1 was perspectives on science and theology. So, the greater necessity of mind. Now having granted 2 of the 3 claims offered by Dennett, have I thereby given away the store? Have I, by my acceptance of evolutionary continuity and by my rejection of special creationism, made the acceptance of Dennett's naturalistic worldview the inevitable conclusion? The usual rhetoric of the popular creation-evolution debate would, I presume, say that I have indeed done so, but let us look more closely at the third claim. In essence, it says that if we are warranted in rejecting the concept of special creation, then we are equally warranted in rejecting any concept of a creator, including one whose comprehensive act of creation consists in the giving of being to a universe generously gifted with a formational economy sufficiently robust to make possible the evolutionary development of self-organizing physical and biotic systems. In other words, Dennett's third claim is, if he has been able to discredit the particular concept of special creation, then he is fully warranted in rejecting the broad theistic doctrine of creation and in presuming that the existence of the entire universe, complete with its remarkably robust formational economy, may be taken for granted. But that is, quite clearly, a non sequitur of colossal proportions. One might even be tempted to say that anyone who fails to recognize that as a non sequitur is simply ignorant, inexcusably ignorant, in a world where 3 out of 4 people have learned to read and write. All that Dennett or Dawkins or other proponents of evolutionary naturalism have been able to demonstrate is that one particular scenario for the historical manifestation of God's creative work, the special creationist scenario, fails to gain empirical support. Contrary to the presumptions of special creationism, there is strong empirical encouragement for the expectation that the formational economy of the universe is sufficiently robust to account for the actualization of all physical and biotic forms known. Now, although that is a relatively simple proposition to state, it represents a truly astounding state of affairs. Those persons who have familiarity with the capabilities that atoms and molecules and cells must have in order for evolutionary development to be possible will recognize the profound significance of granting the credibility of the robust formational economy principle. The list of requisite capabilities is more extensive than our minds are capable of comprehending. For that matter, the list of requisite capacities that make possible just one day of our existence is beyond full comprehension. How is it then that such a remarkable universe has being? Not only must we account for the existence of something in place of nothing, but also of something possessing a host of truly astounding capabilities. Here is, I believe, where the mind-first thesis of theism is in a position to offer an answer vastly more reasonable and satisfying than no mind thesis of naturalism. How does something, a universe, say, come not only to exist, but also to possess a formational economy as robust as the one exhibited by our universe, as the natural sciences are just beginning to realize? If not as an intentional and generous gift from a creator, then how? By consequence of the self-transformational powers of absolutely nothing? Atkins and Dennett would have us to think so, but on what basis? On the convincing power of a boldly stated assertion, or by some unaccountably propitious stroke of luck. Dennett's presentation of Darwin's dangerous idea is crafted to give the appearance of doing away with the need for the prior existence of mind. But I must say that I find the rhetoric wholly unconvincing. In fact, I would argue from his premise that special creationism has been discredited by the growing credibility of the robust formational economy principle to precisely the opposite conclusion that a creative mind is absolutely essential. Dennett places much waste on the explanatory power of an algorithmic process, any material process whose outcome, no matter how complex in appearance, proceeds from the actions of basic material units, atoms, molecules, cells, behaving in accordance with relatively simple rules. Quote, here then is Darwin's dangerous idea. The algorithmic level is the level that best accounts for the speed of the antelope, the wing of the eagle, the shape of the orchid, the diversity of species, and all the other occasions for wonder in the world of nature. No matter how impressive the products of an algorithm, the underlying process always consists of nothing but a set of individually mindless steps succeeding each other without the help of any intelligent supervision. But does the existence of a robust economy of algorithmic processes actually make mind unnecessary? Not at all. Suppose we are to grant that the relevant basic material units do in fact possess the capabilities to act out a set of algorithmic processes, and that the outcome might well be the self-organization of atoms to form molecules, molecules to form cells, cells to form organisms, etc. What thereby becomes unnecessary is not the action of a mind to intend or plan the elements of this robust formational economy, but rather the manipulative intervention of a hand to effect an act of special creation. What still requires mind is a conception of a sufficiently robust algorithmic economy. In fact, the more robust the requisite economy of creaturely capabilities, the more, not less, a creator mind becomes absolutely necessary. The correct conclusion of Dennett's appeal to the existence of a robust economy of algorithmic processes is not that a mindful creator is unnecessary, but rather that the creativity of that mind is far more extensive than has ordinarily been presumed, and that the mindfully intended universe to which the creator has given being is even more generously gifted with formational capabilities than we had initially realized. Why is it then that Dennett and other vocal proponents of naturalism are inclined toward no need for God conclusion? Why would one be led to think that the fruitful functioning of algorithmic processes would displace a mindful creator? Could it be that the recent popularity of special creationism and its handicrafter God has, contrary to the good intentions of its proponents, provided the context for this misunderstanding? I believe a strong case could be made for this thesis. Dennett's own rhetoric points us in that direction. The resistance to this concept of the continuity and sufficiency of material processes comes from those who think there must be some discontinuity somewhere, some skyhooks or moments of special creation, or some other sort of miracles between the prokaryotes and the finest treasures in the libraries. For over a century, skeptics have been trying to find a proof that Darwin's idea just can't work, at least not all the way. They have been hoping for, hunting for, praying for skyhooks as exceptions to what they see as the black vision of Darwin's algorithm churning away. And time and again, they have come up with truly interesting challenges, leaps and gaps, and other marvels that do seem at first to need skyhooks. But then along have come the cranes, discovered in many cases by the very skeptics who were hoping to find a skyhook. The problem lies, I would suggest, with the special creationist proposition of the necessity for skyhooks to preserve a place of need for God in the universe. When the argumentation for the belief in a creator becomes tightly coupled with the thesis that the divine acts of special creation are required to bridge gaps in the formational economy of the universe, the proponents of naturalism are offered an easy apologetic strategy. Demonstrate empirical support for the existence of a formational economy sufficiently robust to make macroevolution possible, and the handicraft or God of special creationism loses his place in the universe. And if the handicraft or God of special creationism is displaced, then why not boldly extrapolate to the presumption that all creator gods have been displaced, including the God who is the ultimate giver of being? Why not? Stated as simply as I am able, because the robust equipped universe requires a giver of being just as much, even more I would say, than does an incomplete universe with gaps in its formational economy. To give being to a universe as richly gifted as our universe appears to be requires a large God, large in creativity, large in generosity, and large in visionary anticipation of potentialities. The universe in which we live is no place for a small God, no place, for instance, for a God whose creative actions are confined to the bridging of gaps in an inadequate formational economy. Proponents of special creation do not, of course, intend to hold a diminished view of their creator. Nonetheless, there is a problematic feature of that perspective that could and often does lead critics of theism to restrict their picture of God's creative work to occasional episodes of patchwork repair jobs. That may sound harsh, but let me explain. Recall that the special creationist perspective espouses a concept of divine creative action that includes as an essential element the provision that some specific physical structures or life forms must have been actualized not by the exercise of creaturely capacities, but by the direct divine action or miraculous divine interventions in the course of time. Furthermore, this special divine action is thought to be essential for the reason that creaturely capacities are deemed inadequate to accomplish the actualization of certain physical or biotic forms. But why would it be the case that creaturely capacities are inadequate for the task of actualizing certain specific physical or biotic forms? Recalling that in the creationist perspective, all creaturely capacities are God-given, we are bound to conclude that any instance of inadequate or missing creaturely capacities is itself a product of divine intervention. In other words, the special creationist perspective necessarily entails the proposition that God intentionally withheld from the creation a carefully selected set of creaturely capacities so that there would be gaps in its formational economy. So, when evolutionists talk about no gaps, God purposefully put those gaps in there, which can't be explained. You see what I'm saying? In the, what is that? In that table of life forms, right? Whoops. Okay, so the fossil record. So here, here are some examples, but there are gaps there in that fossil record. I can't read the Cambrian explosion. That's what it is. The Cambrian explosion is what I'm talking about. So that is our only fossil record. And yet we see all of these big gaps in jumps in our fossil record. Here are some of the earliest Cambrian fossils from the Cambrian period here. And the fossils of the major groups of invertebrates appear in a spectacular explosion of living things unconnected to any evolutionary ancestors. So here we've got entirely different creatures with gaps in between how they got here. And what this book is saying is those gaps are can be identified as being part of God's plan. I have it here in my face. Believing this to be the case, many proponents of special creation are actively engaged in seeking empirical evidence for the presence of these gaps in the formational economy of the universe. Thus, the special creationist perspective has the counterproductive effect of focusing one's attention not on the rich array of remarkable gifts that do characterize the creation's formation economy, but on those few that are presumed to have been withheld from it. Furthermore, if the mark of God's creative action is thought to reside primarily in instances of special creation or of miraculous divine intervention, then there is a strong tendency to treat gaps in our human understanding of physical or biotic processes as evidence for the presence of corresponding gaps in the formational economy of the creation. In its most facile form, the argument is, if I cannot conceive of a creaturely process to accomplish X, then X must have been accomplished by an act of special creation. In some presentations of this perspective, the term special creation is replaced by intelligent design. It is this sort of sentiment that invites zealous proponents of naturalism like Atkins, Dawkins, or Dennett to respond by saying, in effect, but there is a growing empirical evidence that the universe does have the requisite capacities for self-organization and transformation to accomplish the formation of all of the physical structures of living creatures that have ever existed. This being so, then, there is no further need for your handicraft or God to bridge gaps in the universe's formational economy. Thus, there is no longer any room for your God in this universe. Herein lies the tragedy of the creation-evolution debate and its inverted scoring system. As the debate is now structured and most commonly argued, each scientific discovery of some remarkable creaturely capacity that increases the credibility of evolutionary continuity is credited to the worldview of anti-theistic naturalism. The credibility of the Christian theism's historic doctrine of creation, on the other hand, is presumed to be affirmed primarily by empirical evidence for the existence of gaps in the formational economy of the universe. It is no wonder at all that proponents of naturalism like this scoring system. The astounding thing to me is that so many persons within my own Christian community have come to accept it as well. An invitation and a challenge. Let me close with an invitation to theists and a challenge to proponents of naturalism. I invite my fellow theists, particularly those who continue to hold to the special creationist picture of God's creative activity, to enlarge their portrait of the Creator. Allow that portrait to be large enough to include the expectation that the universe to which this Creator has given being has been generously gifted from the outset with the formational economy sufficiently robust to make possible its self-organization into a full array of physical structures and biotic forms that have never been actualized. I don't know why they keep saying economy. Develop the habit of perceiving the self-organizational capabilities of atoms and molecules and cells as evidence, not that God is unnecessary, but that God has been unfathomably generous in the giving of being to his creation. Develop the habit of perceiving the fecundity of the creation's formational economy as evidence, not that God need to be active, but that God's faithful and essential action of blessing the efforts of his creatures has been fruitful beyond our powers to imagine. Finally, I challenge proponents of naturalism, particularly those whose apologetic strategy begins with the employment of the natural sciences to discredit the handicraft or God of special creationism, to face the reality that there are much larger portraits of God that now must be engaged. Recognize that neither the existence of the universe, nor the robustness of its formational economy, nor the fecundity of its developmental history are self-explanatory. Recognize that the facile extrapolation from the discrediting of special creationism to the denial of the need for a creator to give being to the universe represents no substantive accomplishment. Allow the familiar proposition ex nihilo nihil fit to provide the occasion for asking, from what source then does our being proceed? How does the something that exists, the universe, come to have a formational economy as remarkably robust as we are just now beginning to realize? For what purpose did our source of being grant us the gifts that we possess? How then shall we employ these gifts? Oh, I guess we're done. I'm thinking about something else. So that's the end. I'm thinking about about just, you know, my son's shower. And I'm hoping I made a good choice to not be there, because that's what, but still, there's something else that happened. And I'm going to probably have to find out about that too. So anyway, I'm going to keep reporting. I'm going to keep getting on here just to keep teaching, to keep on a steady path until I know otherwise. I've heard otherwise. Thanks for joining me here in the Bookless classroom. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, and we are reading the book, How Large is God? Thanks so much for joining me here in the reading room where I am working to make things healthier for your mind, your body, and your spirit. Thanks for joining me.